Hello and welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Shout About It with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters. Please feel free to join us all here and hit the sub button, leave a like on the video and get ready to chat. Today is Doctor Who Sunday. It's one of those few days in a week where we take the week off from the craziness and talk about Doctor Who. Today we are chatting about The Green Death, which was voted by you, the subscribers. If you would like to vote on the current poll, then please head on over to the community page where you can actually have your say. The Green Death is a third Doctor story. It was written by Robert Solomon, directed by Michael E. Bryant, and it aired between 19th of May to 23rd of June 1973 to an average audience viewing of 7.7 million people, making it the lowest rated of the series 10 in the audience overnight viewership. Now that doesn't mean to say it was the worst received, it just meant not as many people watched it. I don't really know why. It's probably feedback from the previous story. Who knows really at the end of the day. The Doctor is summoned to Wales by the Brigadier after some very strange circumstances have occurred where miners have died in horrific circumstances. The Doctor makes his way to Wales after arriving back from Metebelis 3. After rescuing Joe and Bert from the mines, he discovers that the maggots are the key to the problem. After some digging around at Global Chemicals, the Doctor establishes that the whole operation is run by a computer with a human link. This computer is known as BOSS, or Bimorphic Organizational System Supervisor. The maggots also migrated to the surface after UNIT seals the mine. It then becomes a race against time to figure out what the serendipity discovery Professor Jones had made before becoming infected with the Green Death. They find out it's the vegan fungus meat replacement, so the Doctor and Sergeant Benton spread the fungus around the maggots, and the maggots eat the lot. It seems like it's going to be a happy ending until Jo tells the Doctor she's not coming back to UNIT with him. The Doctor gives her the Sapphire and leaves the party alone. The Green Death is a good story, although I will admit it is not a favourite of mine in particular. It's not one of those so epic type of stories that you will remember it forever and ever, and in many respects it's sometimes quite forgettable. I even forgot that I watched it last year. But it's one of those that also leaves a melancholy feeling in you and a thoughtful feeling in the viewer who is watching it. Now, New Who, take note. This is how you do a message in the story. In this case, though, it was obvious that they were going into the prospects of climate change, veganism, how pollution affects the planet and people, and it's also representative of the mining industry, as there had been mining strikes just before this story aired in 1973, and then there were many more to follow over the years, the most notable under the governance of Margaret Thatcher. So I guess you could say that this story is political in so many ways. It's admittedly nowhere near as harsh as the activism you get today. Robert Solomon could have gone on a massive rant of how eating meat was really bad for you and you could save the planet by eating meat replacements and reducing your carbon footprint and the output of chemicals and fossil fuels and all of that. But he doesn't. Dalekzilla says this: really excellent, environmentally centered story with one of the best and saddest Doctor Who endings ever. Nowadays, vegan activism involves some really bizarre methods, and even though I don't eat meat, the meat replacement is as bad as meat for me. It is vile. I really do not like it. And as for the climate change in this story, well, we didn't see Professor Jones or Nancy supergluing themselves to main roads or tarmac, so it was definitely handled a lot better than the eco-warriors known as Just Stop Oil, who I have covered on this channel in the past. What I'm trying to say is the sheer fact that this story gives you a lot to think about should you wish to do so, but it's actually integrated extremely well into the story. In fact, everything is integrated really well. That's including the prospect of Jo leaving. You get the sense pretty early on that this is going to happen in the story, that she's going to leave. She appears to be very distracted and not really interested in what the Doctor was doing, which was a first for Jo, and the Doctor's reaction is very clear. There's a notion she is leaving. She doesn't spend much time with the Doctor, and the Brigadier is seen more with him. In the end, she leaves. This was probably one of the more saddest of exits since Susan at the time. Whilst she was leaving for a really happy reason, it means the Doctor is alone again. John and Katie play it like grandfather and granddaughter parting ways. There is a degree of denial from John and sadness. They kept the acting simple. The writing was also simple. He hands over the sapphire or the blue crystal and congratulates her, has a drink and leaves. I thought it was very melancholy when you see the Doctor leave the party and Bessie alone. Rant's review Raves says, I enjoy it. It was good to see the love in a fatherly way that the Doctor had for Jo, and knowing that he had to let her go for her own good. It's not my favourite Pertwee story, that being Frontier in Space, but it's a darn good one. They do use Jo really well in this. She was able to give the answer to the Doctor's problem. It was her who had the happy accident, the serendipity moment. A lot of New Who these days has a very easy and obvious conclusion. The happy accident discovery made by the Professor is not an obvious conclusion. You are left to think that it was just that, an accident. So I loved it when it was revealed that the fungi was the answer to stop the Green Death from infecting the population, just as the maggots were starting to evolve into those amazing looking flies which look great for a budget. In actual fact, the practical effects that they did in this story are brilliant. The mucus firing from the slugs onto the humans and they start glowing. Those types of effects are a big ask during the time where advancements in special effects aren't actually as good as they are now. Plenty of great explosions, and Steven sacrifices himself to save the world by blowing up the computer. The computer, weirdly, is one of my least favourite bits throughout the majority of the story. It is fine until the end. I wasn't too keen on the computer being rather jolly and singing, which doesn't seem like something a computer would do to me. So, I put that down to the human connection in the end. The effects for it were fine though, and I like the fact that the humans had to be processed in order to do the computer's processing. I really like the name for the computer. It's definitely very Doctor Who. It's called Biomorphic Organisational System Supervisor, otherwise known as BOSS. I like John's reaction to this. The slight smile and then the ha. That's all in part 5. Now, I just want to talk about part 5 briefly. This has probably some of the funniest moments in John's run. John's Doctor is generally a very serious Doctor that's a bit of a caped crusader and superhero, and I admire John for being, the stunt and action man that he is, even though I don't particularly like those aspects of his Doctor. However, it does actually lead to one of my favourite interactions with him and Captain Yates. The Doctor was locked up, and Yates, who had shockingly been revealed as the undercover position in part 4, goes in to save the Doctor from being locked up. But the Doctor mistakes him for someone else and grabs him by the scruff of the collar and pins him to the wall. The Doctor realises his mistake and he apologises to Yates, and Yates says, think nothing of it, and then passes out, to which the Doctor tells him to pull himself together whilst picking him up off the floor. It's a really funny interaction, and I always forget that this interaction actually exists, and it makes me laugh every time I see it. It's a moment of hilarity in amidst the chaos that is actually going on, which you didn't always get in Doctor Who. Clearly the writer was thinking along the same lines, because later on in the same episode, the Doctor uses the sapphire or blue crystal to pull Yates out of a trance and accidentally puts the Brigadier into one. Now, Nicholas Courtney's face is completely deadpan, and I hate to think how many times they would have had to rehearse that in order for them to not actually burst out laughing and just get it into their system. The use of the sapphire or the blue crystal is brilliant, although I do wish we had seen the Doctor collect it properly. Maybe had part 1 actually been set up to do that in its entirety and then go into the mine later, it would have been a bit better. It kind of felt like a lot of cutaways for part 1, to which were acting like a filler, even though it does actually have integrity to the plot. Ideally, I would have liked to have had him arrive a little bit earlier. He does actually arrive in Wales 20 minutes into part 1, and I must say I was actually agreeing silently with the Brigadier when he was like, right, finally we can get on. All that action we got could have been reserved for the action in the mines. I would have liked to have seen more of that. Part 1 had a good cliffhanger of the lift going out of control. Some of the strongest acting in this story comes in the first 3 parts because the action and the mystery allows for it. I love the Doctor and the brig stopping the wheel, the fact there is sabotage, the miners glowing green, the Doctor saying good grief as a reaction to the maggots, the cliffhanger of the giant maggot going towards Joe and the Doctor. All of that is great stuff and makes me want more time within the mine. I think they could have almost bottled this episode. One thing that this would do, this particular story, especially in part 3, is terrify the viewers. A lot of people are actually terrified of maggots. So imagine a sea of maggots and you having to push yourself through it in a cart. Disgusting stuff, and I imagine it to be quite scary. Steve Adar says this: one of my favourite stories from Pertwee's era. Remember it scaring me at the time, but that was okay. It's what I'd come to expect from Doctor Who, and it's partly why we tuned in. I was only 9 when it first aired, so understood the underlying message with later viewings. Good story, one of the best. The process from a computer making the character self-destruct. That is a terrifying moment as well. That's also a very terrifying thought that one day computers may control our minds, or maybe I'm just a conspiracy theorist. I must admit, I wasn't too keen on the props squeaking in the mine though, and the polystyrene, at least I think it was polystyrene, was being picked up on the recording. Now, we do see the use of the sonic screwdriver. Yay! You know what I think of the sonic screwdriver, and we all know why it was taken away in later years. In this case, in part 5, we see the reason for it being taken away. Well, this wasn't used as the reason to take it away, but it is an example. The Doctor getting the Professor and Joe out of their little cave because of the genius idea of the armour-plated maggots trapping them inside. By using the sonic to produce a high-pitched sonic noise, to paralyse the maggots was a very simple choice. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card. It was just way too easy, and I think they could have executed that a little bit better. But overall, this story is a good story with an environmentally friendly message that has been integrated into the plot, made part of the plot, and it is done very naturally and should act as an example to the current day Doctor Who. That's what I think. Let me know what you think. Chat about it, don't shout about it. I will see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.